Michael Gargiulo. On the night of February 21st, 2001, Ashton Kutcher knocked on his girlfriend's door in Hollywood. She didn't answer. He peered through the window, noticed what looked like wine spilled across the floor, and left. He assumed she'd gone out without him. Ashley Ellerin had been stabbed 47 times. She was still inside. Gargiulo had been there first. Ashley was 22, a fashion design student whose father had visited her from Northern California just hours before she died. Her roommate found her the next morning. Her mother described getting the phone call. She fell to her knees and crawled across the bedroom floor screaming. That detail never made it into any case file. It lived only in a mother who carried it for 18 years. But Ashley wasn't the first. 8 years earlier, in Glenview, Illinois, Trisha Pacaccio was 18 years old with an engineering scholarship to Purdue waiting for her in the fall. She grew up 1 block from Michael Gargiulo. Her younger brother, Douglas, was his friend. On August 14, 1993, her father opened the front door and found her dead on the back doorstep, stabbed 12 times. Her left arm had been twisted until it snapped. Gargiulo was 17. Investigators identified him early, couldn't prove it, and watched him leave Illinois in Los Angeles in 1998. He spent the next decade working as an air conditioning repairman, a man paid to enter homes, learn layouts, understand locks. He lived in the same apartment complex as Maria Bruno, a mother of 4. He lived across the alley from Michelle Murphy. He lived near Ashley Ellerin. In 2008, Murphy woke up to find him standing over her. She fought. He fled, bleeding, leaving his own DNA across her apartment floor. That blood matched the DNA pulled from beneath Trisha Pacaccio's fingernails in 1993. It matched Ashley Ellerin's scene. It matched Maria Bruno's, a woman prosecutors said had been quite literally butchered, her body mutilated in ways the trial transcripts still struggle to describe. 3 victims confirmed, 1 survivor, 1 man who repaired air conditioners and attended acting classes between killings. The jury convicted him on all counts in 2019, death sentence in 2021. Illinois is still waiting to try him for Trisha Pacaccio, the girl next door he killed first. She still hasn't had her day in court. The next family waited 31 years just to watch their killer die in a cell. Lonnie Franklin Jr. In 2009, a California detective stared at a DNA database result that made no sense. The match wasn't perfect, but it was close enough to point at a father. The father's name was Lonnie Franklin Jr. He lived on West 81st Street in South Los Angeles, blocks from where 10 women had been discarded in alleys and trash bins over the previous 2 decades. He fixed cars in his driveway. He brought gifts to elderly neighbors. He washed dishes by his window. He had been doing it since 1985. Deborah Jackson was 29 years old, a mother of 2, working as a waitress, when Franklin shot her 3 times in the chest and left her in an alley. Over the next 22 years, 9 more women followed, shot, strangled, dumped like garbage. Many were struggling with addiction. Many were sex workers. The LAPD formed a task force, offered a $500,000 reward, and went nowhere. Then, the killings stopped entirely for 14 years. This is where the police made their biggest mistake. Franklin had a criminal record stretching 4 decades, 15 arrests, including a gang rape conviction while serving in the U.S. Army. But the specific nature of his California convictions meant the state never collected his DNA. He was invisible to every database running while his victims' families buried their daughters. What finally broke it was his son. Christopher Franklin caught a felony weapons charge in 2009 and submitted his DNA. The familial search flagged it as a near match to evidence pulled from the Grim Sleeper's crime scenes. Detectives placed Lonnie under surveillance. A detective posed as a busboy at a pizza parlor. They collected a discarded slice and utensils. Perfect match. He was arrested on July 7, 2010. In his home, investigators found hundreds of photographs, women naked, unconscious, bleeding. One showed Anitra Washington, a survivor who had testified against him. He had kept it hidden behind a wall in his garage for 22 years. In 2016, the jury convicted him on all 10 counts. Death sentence. He never faced the needle. Lonnie Franklin Jr. died in his San Quentin cell on March 28, 2020. Cause of death undisclosed. The families waited 31 years for justice. They got a verdict. They never got an execution. He chose when he left. The next man's victims never got that choice, and neither did the innocent man who served 11 years for his crimes. Chester Dwayne Turner. In 2003, a CODIS database match came back on a convicted rapist already sitting in a California prison cell. Then another match, then another. Detective Cliff Shepard later described what happened next as DNA hits coming like water from a faucet. The name attached to every single one was Chester Dwayne Turner. He had been delivering pizzas for Domino's. From 1987 to 1998, Turner worked the Figueroa Street corridor in South Los Angeles, preying on women struggling with addiction, homelessness, and sex work. He raped them, strangled them, and left them in alleys, dumpsters, behind vacant buildings, inside portable toilets. 10 women confirmed, 14 total. One victim was 6.5 months pregnant. Another was 5 months pregnant. Both unborn children died with their mothers. But this is where the case takes a shocking twist. While Turner was still killing, the LAPD had already solved the case. They just had the wrong man. David Allen Jones, a part-time janitor with the mental capacity of an 8-year-old, was convicted in 1995 of 3 murders Turner had committed. Jones confessed under interrogation, denied the killings throughout, and had no DNA evidence against him. None. He spent 11 years in prison for Chester Turner's crimes. Turner kept strangling women the entire time Jones sat in a cell. The only reason Turner's DNA ever entered the system was a 2002 rape conviction, a completely separate crime. When investigators finally submitted the cold case DNA, the matches came instantly. Turner had been arrested 7 times between 1995 and 2002 for drugs and theft. Not one of those convictions required a DNA sample. 11 women died in that gap. At trial in 2007, he claimed the DNA proved nothing beyond consensual sex. His defense called it payment in trade. The jury convicted him on all 10 murder counts and recommended death. In 2014, 4 more victims, death again. In 2024, Utah charged him with the 1998 murder of Etisha Camp, a case that sat untouched for 26 years because her DNA had been entered incorrectly into a database. Chester Dwayne Turner sits on death row at San Quentin today. David Allen Jones received a $720,000 settlement and his freedom back. The families of 14 women are still waiting for an execution date. The next killer spent 26 years, 20 minutes from the crime scene, close enough to drive past the billboards. Joseph Zeeler. In September 2016, a Cape Coral detective got a CODIS notification on a double murder from 1990. That DNA sitting in that file had been waiting 26 years for someone to walk into the system. That someone had shot his stepson with a pellet gun. May 10, 1990. Jan Cornell went to her boyfriend's house to watch a basketball game and fell asleep. She came home at 4 a.m. to find her front door open, her back sliding door blown wide, blinds moving in the dark. She found her daughter Robin upstairs, 11 years old, sexually assaulted, smothered with a pillow. In the next room, Lisa Story, Robin's babysitter who had moved into the condo less than 24 hours earlier. Same method, same result.
Before leaving, Zeeler ransacked the home and stole whatever he could carry. Then he arranged Robin Cornell's photographs on an ironing board and left them there for her mother to find. Cape Coral police had a complete DNA profile from the crime scene by the late 1990s. They uploaded it to CODIS and waited. America's Most Wanted featured the case 3 times. Billboards went up across Cape Coral. Jan Cornell gave interviews for 2 decades, keeping her promise to Robin that she would never stop looking. Joseph Zieler lived 20 minutes away in North Fort Myers the entire time. He could have driven past those billboards. He could have watched those episodes. He walked free for 26 years because none of his prior convictions, including violent felonies 2 months after the murders, required DNA collection under Florida law. When his pellet gun arrest finally put him in the system, the match came back immediate and absolute. 1 in 83 quintillion on Robin's bedsheet alone. For reference, Earth holds 8 billion people. At trial in 2023, Zieler claimed a motorcycle accident had erased his memory of everything before 1998. The jury convicted him on all counts. During sentencing, he beckoned his own attorney close and elbowed him in the face. When brought back before the judge, he snarled and revealed the word "killer" written across his teeth. The jury voted 10-2 for death. He got 2 sentences. It took 33 years. Jan Cornell kept her promise. The next set of mothers made promises too. Not all of them lived long enough to see them kept. Before the next case, do one thing for the ones who can't. Tell me in the comments which of them, the daughters, the mothers, has stayed with you so far, because that's how they'll be remembered. And subscribe, because the families ahead waited longer than anyone should have to. One buried a daughter with no name for 25 years before a single match brought her home. The next killer needed only 5 months to take 4 lives, and one mother spent the rest of hers refusing to let them be forgotten. William Lewis Reese. Sandra Sapa was 19 years old when she decided she would rather hit asphalt at highway speed than stay in that truck. She jumped. She survived. And without knowing it, she ended a killing spree that had already taken 4 lives across 2 states in 5 months. William Reese had been driving a white pickup with a horse trailer up and down the corridors between Oklahoma and Houston since April 1997. He stopped at gas stations and car washes. He posed as a good Samaritan, helpful, ordinary, forgettable. Laura Smither was 12 years old, jogging a quarter mile from her home in Friendswood when he found her. Kelly Ann Cox was a straight-A psychology major and single mother to a 1-year-old daughter when she crossed her path at a Conoco payphone. Tiffany Johnston was a newlywed, 3 months married, working at a car wash in Bethany, Oklahoma. Jessica Kane was 17, driving home from a theater cast party, her car abandoned on Interstate 45.
He buried 2 of them with a bulldozer. The only reason anyone ever found them was because Reese decided their locations were worth something. He had been sitting in a Texas prison since 1998, 60 years for Sandra Sapa's kidnapping, while 4 families searched. Investigators knew his name. They had known it within days of Laura Smither's disappearance, but DNA laws at the time didn't require collection for his specific convictions, and the evidence from Tiffany Johnston's body sat in an Oklahoma evidence locker for 18 years, waiting for someone to test it against him. When they finally did in 2015, the match held. He began confessing, not just to Johnston, but to all of them. He offered the locations of Kelly Cox and Jessica Kane in exchange for the death penalty coming off the table in Texas. 2 counties accepted. Oklahoma's district attorney refused. In 2021, the Oklahoma jury deliberated 1 hour. Death sentence. At formal sentencing, Reese was asked if he wished to speak. He said no. The judge said justice would not be delayed any longer. Tiffany Johnston's mother had met Reese years earlier while waitressing to help pay for her daughter's wedding. Gay Smither founded a national nonprofit to find missing children, while her own daughter's case sat cold for 18 years. She wore Laura's photo around her neck to his guilty plea. The next mother didn't know her daughter's killer had a name for 25 years. Lucius Boyd. Danya DaCosta was 21 years old, stranded at a Texaco station near Interstate 95 at close to midnight, and a man pulled up in a church van and offered her a ride.
She sang in the choir. She was studying pediatric nursing. She attended late-night prayer services and was working part-time at American Express to pay her way through school. The van had a church on the side of it. The man behind the wheel worked there as a handyman. She got in. Lucius Boyd drove her to his apartment, subjected her to a brutal physical assault, and stabbed her 36 times with what prosecutors believed was a Torx screwdriver. He sexually assaulted her, wrapped her body in sheets and a shower curtain, and dumped her behind a warehouse next to a trash bin in Oakland Park. The judge who sentenced him called the killing conscienceless, pitiless, and unnecessarily torturous. 2 weeks later, a boater found a woman's body in a grassy area off a highway in southwest Broward County. She had been raped and murdered. Nobody knew her name. She would stay a Jane Doe for 25 years.
And here is what makes this case different from every other on this list. While Eileen Trupner lay unidentified in a county file, her killer was already on death row for Danya's murder. Boyd's DNA was sitting in CODIS. The biological evidence from Trupner's rape kit had been properly preserved. The two crimes were committed 2 weeks apart in the same county by the same man. It took until 2023 for Florida investigators using genetic genealogy to identify Trupner's remains, and then one database comparison to confirm Boyd had killed her too. His family ran Boyd Funeral Homes. His father founded it. Lucius Boyd was also a trained mortician. He had beaten a rape charge in 1997. He had beaten a murder charge in 1993 by claiming self-defense. Investigators believe the number of women he assaulted without consequence was, in their words, astronomical. At his 2002 sentencing, he stood in a bright red jumpsuit and showed nothing. During a later appeal hearing, a woman rose from the gallery and shouted that he had raped her. Eileen Trupner's sister said the wound felt like yesterday. It had been 25 years. Boyd is still on death row. No execution date has been set. No closure. The next killer was already serving 7 life sentences when they found him. Clarence Wayne Dixon. On January 5, 1978, a Maricopa County judge signed a release order for a man who had been found not guilty by reason of insanity for attacking a 15-year-old with a metal pipe. The judge's name was Sandra Day O'Connor. She would later sit on the United States Supreme Court. She ordered civil commitment proceedings to begin within 10 days. Clarence Dixon walked out 2 days later. On January 7, 1978, in her apartment near the Arizona State University campus in Tempe, Deanna Bodwin came home from a night out with a friend. She was 21 years old, 1 semester from graduating, fluent in Spanish and Portuguese, a poet who spent the previous summer traveling Europe by train with her sister. She had just had dinner with her parents that evening. She went to bed. Dixon lived directly across the street. Nobody in Deanna's life knew his name. Her boyfriend found her body at 2 a.m., strangled with her own macrame belt, stabbed 3 times in the chest, sexually assaulted in her own bed. He cut the belt off and attempted CPR. The case went cold before the decade ended. DNA profiling didn't exist yet. The evidence was preserved and shelved, and Deanna's parents spent the rest of their lives without an answer. 23 years later, a single detective decided to run the DNA.
In 2001, Tempe cold case detective Tom Magazzini submitted the preserved semen profile to CODIS. The hit came back to Clarence Dixon, already serving 7 consecutive life sentences in an Arizona prison for raping 2 women at Northern Arizona University in 1985. His DNA had been in the database for years. Nobody had checked it against Deanna's case until that morning. At trial in 2008, Dixon fired his lawyers and represented himself, arguing a government conspiracy had fabricated the DNA. The jury deliberated 20 minutes, death sentence in 20 more. He was executed on May 11, 2022. It took the team 25 minutes to find a vein, eventually making an incision in his groin.
His final words addressed Deanna directly. "I don't know you and I don't remember you. You know I didn't kill you." Her sister Leslie had attended 43 hearings over 20 years. Their parents never saw a single one. Dixon addressed Deanna from the gurney and said he didn't remember her. The next man remembered everything and asked the judge to kill him for it. James Earl Patterson. In 1999, the Virginia Division of Forensic Science ran a cold case DNA profile against 175,000 inmate samples and got a hit. The man it matched was already in prison. He was serving 25 years for raping an 18-year-old woman in Hopewell. His name was James Earl Patterson. He had committed the murder at 19 years old, been arrested for a separate rape, and sat in the Virginia prison system for over a decade while the evidence from Joyce Aldridge's home waited in a forensic lab with no name attached to it. When investigators confronted him with the match, he confessed immediately. October 11, 1987. Joyce Aldridge was 56 years old, a mother and grandmother living in Prince George County, Virginia. Patterson had met her briefly through her daughter, a passing acquaintance from nights of drinking and cocaine. That was the only connection. He broke into her home to rob it. When she found she had little money, he raped her. Then he stabbed her 3 times in the abdomen and left. What happened next is the detail that makes this case unlike any other on this list. Joyce Aldridge didn't die. She pulled herself to the phone and called the police. She tried to call her son. Patterson heard about the call somehow and came back. He stabbed her 14 more times. 17 stab wounds total. Responding officers found her body. The case went cold because Patterson was transient, barely connected to the household, and not in any database. It stayed cold for 12 years until Virginia, which maintained the largest state DNA felon database in the country, ran the crime scene evidence proactively against every profile they had. When Patterson was presented with the result, he didn't fight it. He pleaded guilty in 2000, asked the judge to impose death, and waived every appeal. From death row, he gave a phone interview and said simply, "The penalty fit the crime. I was responsible and I want to pay the ultimate price." On March 14, 2002, he was strapped to a gurney at Greensville Correctional Center. The Aldridge family watched from a separate room. He addressed them directly, apologizing, asking for forgiveness, describing what he had done as the evil I brought into this world. He was the first person in United States history executed on the basis of a DNA cold hit. Joyce Aldridge was the reason that technology now has a name. Patterson waived every appeal and walked toward it. The next man spent 32 years insisting the courts had the wrong person, while the evidence kept pulling in 2 directions at once. Carlton Gary. In the fall of 1977, in the tree-lined Winton neighborhood of Columbus, Georgia, elderly women stopped sleeping with their windows open. Florence Scheibel was 89 years old, nearly blind, and spent her days tending her yard and reciting baseball batting averages from memory. On October 21st, her son came to visit and found her beaten, her neck broken, strangled in her own home, 10 days before her 90th birthday. Martha Thurmond, a retired schoolteacher, was found strangled 4 days later when she failed to show up at a relative's house. Kathleen Woodruff, widow of a university football coach, was found on December 28th, strangled with her late husband's varsity football scarf. 7 women died between September 1977 and April 1978. 2 survived. The killer entered through windows and back doors in the evenings, assaulted their victims, covered their bodies with pillows and sheets when he was done, and disappeared back into a neighborhood that never saw him coming. This is where the police made their biggest mistake. Carlton Gary was investigated in 1979 after his arrest for armed robbery in South Carolina. Investigators ran his fingerprints. No match came back. They ruled him out and moved on. What nobody caught was that his prints had been filed under a different name, one of several aliases he used. He walked out of prison in 1984, returned to Columbus, and within weeks was arrested again when a stolen pistol from the Winton neighborhood was traced back to him. This time, the fingerprints matched 4 crime scenes.
Carlton was a model, literally. He appeared in television commercials for a high-fashion clothing store in Columbus during the same months he was strangling elderly women in the same city. Charismatic, well-built, intelligent, the kind of man nobody looked at twice. He was convicted on all counts in 1986 and spent 32 years on death row, insisting the courts had the wrong man. Post-conviction DNA testing complicated everything, matching him to one uncharged victim while excluding him from a survivor's clothing. Courts denied every appeal. The paradox never resolved. On March 15, 2018, Carlton Gary was strapped to a gurney in Jackson, Georgia. When asked if he had final words, he said nothing. The families of 7 women had waited 40 years for that silence. Carlton Gary declined his last meal. The next man felt the needle burning in his left arm and still didn't say their names. Billy Jack Krutzinger. Pearl McGork was 89 years old and spent her days in the garden. Her daughter, Patricia Siren, 71, volunteered as a receptionist at her church. They lived together in Fort Worth, Texas, a mother and daughter sharing a home in retirement, offering kindness to the people around them. One of those people was Billy Jack Krutzinger. They had given him work before. On April 6, 2003, they let him in again. He stabbed Pearl at least 7 times and slit her throat. He stabbed Patricia at least 9 times and slit hers. He left the broken murder weapon in their bathroom, took Patricia's Cadillac and credit card, and drove to Galveston. A relative found both women 2 days later. This is the part where the case takes a turn nobody saw coming, because it was already over. Within hours of the bodies being found, Fort Worth detectives were tracking purchases on the stolen credit card. The trail led straight to bars in Galveston. Officer Clemente Garcia approached a man who gave a false name and arrested him for failure to identify himself. The man was Krutzinger. He was 48 years old, homeless, and still had the victim's blood on his story. He confessed in custody. He told investigators where he had thrown his clothes, a trash bin near where he abandoned the car. The clothing was soaked in blood. The broken knife in the bathroom had DNA from both victims and from him. The case was closed in 3 days. What the swift resolution couldn't clean up was what the system had already missed. In 1998, Krutzinger had been convicted of recklessly injuring an elderly person. Probation. A month in jail. Released back into the same communities where elderly women lived alone and sometimes needed a handyman they thought they could trust.
Pearl and Patricia had offered him honest work. That was the last kindness they ever showed anyone. The jury took less than 2 hours to sentence him to death. He spent 16 years at Huntsville appealing, assisted by a lawyer later removed from death row cases for filing cut-and-paste briefs across dozens of clients. On September 4, 2019, the lethal injection began. Krutzinger said he could feel it burning in his left arm. He did not mention Pearl or Patricia by name. No family members came to watch. 10 cases, 10 DNA matches that came years, sometimes decades too late. The evidence was always there, waiting for a law to catch up, a database to expand, or one detective who decided to run the profile one more time. The victims were real. The gaps were not inevitable. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.